Much better. Good to see everyone here this morning. Just a few quick announcements. A friend of Chris Mays, Justin Dobbins, is in Baptist South and would like us to keep him in our prayers. Also, Brother Brian Weldon is in Baptist Prattville. He's in room 150. He wasn't feeling great yesterday, feeling just a smidgen better today, but is he up for visitors yet, or? Okay. Okay. And they think that's all revolving around a UTI, or? Okay. So let's make sure we keep him in our prayers. And check before you go over to see if he feels like a visitor. I know when I'm sick, I'm like a grouchy bear. I just want to crawl off in a cave. And first time I got really sick, Andrea learned real quick just to open the door, slide food in, and close the door. So I'm not a good patient when I'm sick. And speaking of that, if I'm a little bit grouchier or grumpier than usual, just bear with me. I made a visit to the doctor and just tried to start losing some weight, so I'm having to do away with all the good food. So that can cause me to get grumpy. So. Oh, grouchy comes from age also, so I've got a double on it. Okay. And let's keep Brother Terry in our prayers. He will be going up for an infusion on the 23rd of the month to Birmingham. So traveling on a 23rd before the holiday, present in Birmingham. So let's keep him in our prayers. Also, Sister Janice with her gastro problem or esophageal problem. Anyone else that would? Diane says she's doing a lot better and she appreciates the prayers, and we knew she was better because she's here. So, anyone else? Yes, sir. Lisa. Oh. Lisa's grandfather passed away yesterday. No funeral arrangements yet or anything? Location? Clanton. Okay. No, we'll probably know more this afternoon at service on that. Okay. And also, when's her next doctor? 6th of January. Ah. So she must be, okay. Understand. Also, with it being the time of the year it is, there's a lot of people that are on the roads traveling. The Conyers are going to be traveling this week. Day after Christmas, they're leaving, going down to Florida for a visit. Several Beverly's out, so let's keep all those in our prayers. Brother Scott, would you lead us in a prayer before we begin class, please? I didn't mention it, but I called his name, so you know that the Ingrams are home for a visit for the holidays. So good to see them here. Yes, ma'am. Justin, we've already mentioned him. The walls of his heart are too thick for surgery. Need heart surgery. Okay. Okay. Update on that one. So, Deuteronomy chapter 22. I'm going to attempt to cover 3 chapters today. We're moving along. This is, we've said before, sort of a restatement of what has occurred previously, and Moses is in his second speech or second sermon to the group, which goes through chapter 26. But what we're going to do is just scan through here and hit a few of the points. Verses 1 through 12 deal with various laws. For instance, starting out with verse 1, it says, "Thou shalt not see and pay particular attention to that word not. Thou shalt not see thy brother's ox or his sheep go astray and hide thyself from them. Thou shalt in any case bring them again unto thy brother." So I emphasize 2 words: that you don't see something happen and you don't hide from it. But what would that whole verse then mean? If you see somebody's animals go astray in this particular verse, what are you to do? Ignore it? Don't act like you didn't see it. Don't try to hide from it. The emphasis is that you are supposed to help. And then we can go down to verse 2, just the end of that, and it says, and this is talking about something a little different, but it says, "Thou shalt restore it to him again." And in verse 3, "In like manner shalt thou do with his ass, and so thou shalt do with his raiment, and with all lost things of thy brothers which he had lost, and thou hast found, shalt thou do likewise. Thou mayest not hide thyself." I ask you a question based on this. This time of year is busy. Let's say you're walking through a store and you see somebody with their hands in their pocket, and they take their hands out of their pocket, and you see a bill of some denomination fall to the floor, and they walk on. Don't answer this, no show of hands, but are you going to pick that money up and stick it in your pocket because it's their loss, or are you going to pick that money up and try to track them down and give it back to them? That's what this verse here says, that if you can possibly take care of someone, you're supposed to do that. You're not supposed to ignore and hide from the fact. Andrew, and in like manner, Andrew and I was at an estate sale a couple of weeks ago, and the lady told me how much money I needed to pay her, and I handed her money, and she was making change, and the change came out to, should have been 50 cents, some bills and 50 cents. She counted out 3/4 to me, and I just sort of stood there and looked at it and looked at her, and got her attention, and she seemed amazed that someone would do that over a quarter. So you wonder how many times they've been in the dollar bill range. So we're supposed to, and all this is getting to is that we are supposed to be honest. We're supposed to help people, not do things to hurt people. It goes on then to say, verse 4, "Thou shalt not see thy brother's ass or ox fall down in the way, and hide thyself from them. Thou shalt surely help him to lift them up again." Similarly, if we are, today, it's not quite as important, because I don't know of anybody that doesn't have a cell phone to make a call. And as dangerous as the roadways are today in stopping and trying to help somebody, you get into that questionable area. But If I see a wreck happen, I'm stopping. If somebody is just broken down and they outside on the phone and look like they've got things under control, that's a judgment call. But I know back in the days before cell phones, back in the days before things, I was probably 7 years old. And we was traveling along, and my dad saw this car on the side of the road, and it was jacked up and standing out. There was one person down on the ground that looked like they was attempting to change the tire, and there was 3 ladies standing around watching. Dad stopped to help. The first thought he had was, uh-oh, we got 4 women out here. We got a woman trying to change a tire. Now ladies, don't throw bricks at me on this one, okay? But when we got up there, come to find out that the man that was on the ground trying to change the tire was missing a leg. It was very difficult for him to get leverage, and even Dad and I had a tough time. Well, Dad, I'm 6 or 7 years old, I can't do much. But they had put the lug nuts on with impact wrenches. Yes, I'm not that old. They had impact wrenches when I was young. But it took him, my dad had to really strain to get that loose. If we had not stopped, how long would they have been sitting on the side of the road? And that was way back in the days before cell phones. So just try to stop and help. Yeah. That's true. We do have to use more judgment on that today, and that's why I prefaced it with a few things there, but absolutely. Verse 5 then said, excuse me, yes, ma'am. Anybody, right? Absolutely. Verse 5 says, the woman shall not wear that which pertaineth unto a man, neither shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all that do so are an abomination unto the Lord thy God. I think we need a little background on this one before everybody starts throwing bricks at me. If you looked at the world during this particular time period, the garments that they wore were almost indistinguishable male to female. So what are they talking about? Well, when you get down and look at it, the Canaanites and others in that region, when they worshiped Venus, Asherah, Ashtaroth, the women put on armor, garments of war, to do the worship. Is this possibly what it's talking about? And there are other examples that you can go through, but basically, if you want to just to eliminate all of that and just look at what the verse is trying to tell you in general, it is telling you, men be men, women be women. Don't try to dress or act or do anything different than the two. Now, if you make those kind of comments today, the world being what the world is, that's where you're going to have to put on the whole armor of God, as Ephesians 6 tells us, and stand, because slings and arrows are going to come your way if you say men are supposed to be men and women supposed to be women. That's what this verse says in a spiritual sense. Yes, sir.
There's also, I think there's a website, there's a lady selling gender neutral clothes. I enjoy being a lady. I've never been a female, and I don't want to be. That's different.
Well, there are also some states today that if you are a cop and stop them and check their driver's license, in the gender spot, they will have X. They're not identifying as one or the other. My question to the law enforcement, to the government on this issue is, if you're going to try to identify a criminal, do you say that that bank robber that ran out of that bank is gender X? Or are you going to try to identify them by what they look like? You're going to identify them by what they look like. So, all right, we get stopped down the road. We stop this car down the road that we think was involved in that bank heist, and there somebody pulls out a ID that says X. I'm not one or the other. What does the cop do in his mind when he is talking to that individual, regardless of what that ID card says? You look like that individual. So they're going to take them in for further questioning, get to the bottom of it. I'm not sure I'm going to be accurate about this. One of you computer gurus like Joel or maybe Scott back there can tell me. But 3 or 4 or 5 months ago, it's my understanding that on the internet, certain sites, there's 70 or 72 different identities that you can come up with, male to female, dealing with male, female, transgender, both. I don't know. I don't care. Just Brother Clunch. That's correct. Verse 6 through 7 then talks about if a bird's nest chance to be before thee in the way or on the ground, whether they be young or ones or eggs, and the dam sit upon the young and upon the eggs, thou shalt not take the dam with the young. This just gets into some of their ways of dealing with foods. Verse 8, when thou buildest a new house, then thou shalt make a battlement for thy roof, and thou bring not blood upon thine house, if any man fall from thence. I use the King James. I love the King James. I'm familiar with it. Other versions of the Bible, when you get to battlement, what will you find in place of the word battlement? Railing, parapet, balustrade, words of that. In essence, what it means is that the roofs in those days were basically flat. If you go to Peter in the New Testament, we find out he was on the roof waiting for, and what it meant was that they needed to put a railing, some kind of guard around it, so someone up there wouldn't just be walking around and fall off the roof, because then you would be responsible. Yes, sir, they sure did. If we bring that up to relatively modern day, you go up to a lot of the New England states and even the Carolinas and all, you will see houses constructed with something that we call, in Florida also, a widow's walk. What is a widow's walk? It is basically a flat spot on top of the house, either made there intentionally or part of the house, and it has a railing on it. Do you know the origin of the widow's walk? Basically, it was so they could have an unobstructed view to the sea and watch for those waiting for their return. Correct. Very good. So, again, your house is, if you build a house, you're supposed to have it as safe as possible because you're responsible, again, for your neighbor, whoever visits. And then it talks in verse 9 on, thou shalt not sow the vineyard with divers seed. You're supposed to keep things separated. You're not supposed to mix up the animals that plow. You're not to wear garments that are mixed. We do that all the time today. We're in a whole different generation, different era. Talks about making fringes on the quarters and not wearing them as normal wear, but the religious wear, they did things like that. So that takes care of some of the various laws. Now, when we get to verse 13 through the rest of the chapter, we're going to be dealing with laws of sexual immorality. Now, when we talk about some of this, I'm not going into detail. If you want more detail on it, you can go do the research yourself. But verse 13 says, if any man take a wife and go in unto her and hate her and give occasion of speech against her and bring an evil name upon her and say, I took this woman, and when I came to her, I found her not a maid. Then shall the father of the damsel and her mother take and bring forth the tokens of the damsel's virginity unto the elders of the city and the gate. And the damsel's father shall say unto the elders, I gave my daughter unto this man to wife, and he hated her. And lo, he hath given occasion of speech against her, saying, I found not thy daughter a maid, and yet these are the tokens of my daughter's virginity, and they shall spread the cloth before the elders of the city, and the elders of that city shall take that man and chastise him. Like I said, we're not going to get into some of the specifics of how their rituals and ways of knowing things like that. We're only going to look at it on the spiritual side. It was very, very important that, and remember, back in these days, they didn't go out and date like we do today. There was arrangements made within families. So apparently what this is saying is that this guy married this woman that had been betrothed to him, that an arrangement had been made, and for whatever reason, he didn't like her. So he brings an accusation against her, and in the first case, it's a false accusation that she was not a virgin. She was not what you told me she was, so therefore, I want to be free of this contract. And based on the proof, and like I said, we're not going that road. Right. Right, but he was going to secretly put her away and not make a big deal out of it. Yes, sir. But once it's found false, the elders of the city chastise him, and they shall immerse him in 100 shekels of silver. What does that word mean? Immerse. Charge, hold accountable, punish. Charge him with, he has to pay the father. Why the father, not the damsel? Well, and also, up until the time she leaves her father's house, who is responsible? The father. And if he give the woman the money, she's just going to have to give it back to him sometime later. But anyway, gives it to the father because it brought an evil name upon. Well, throughout history, sometimes the bride had to pay the dowry, and sometimes the bridegroom had to pay the dowry. So but then it says, if this thing be true, then shall they bring out the damsel to the door of her father's house, and the men of the city shall stone her with stones. that she die, because she wrought folly in Israel to play the harlot. Huh? Right, absolutely. So if the guy brings a false accusation, he not only has to pay the father, but now there is no escape clause. She's yours forever. But if it is true, then they stone her. Questions or comments then through verse 21 by Brother Clunch? Absolutely. And this is only in case the husband don't like the wife. Nothing is said about the man being a forgiving man and liking her and keeping her, and this is just if he brings a charge against her. When we get down to verse 22, we're looking at a sort of a different area. We're talking about if a man be found lying with a woman married to an husband, then they shall both of them die. Both the man which lay with the woman and the woman, they shall be put away the evil from Israel. No questions about it. Straightforward. But we know from reading farther on in the Old Testament that this did not take place in a lot of cases. That law was still in effect when David was king. And we know what happened with David and Bathsheba. So even though it is a law, there were some violations of that law later. Verse 23, if a damsel, or what's the difference between a married woman and a damsel? A damsel would be one that would be old enough to marry, but not married yet, could be betrothed. And if a damsel that is a virgin be betrothed unto an husband, and a man find her in the city and lie with her, then ye shall bring them both out of the gate of that city, and ye shall stone them with stones that they die. The damsel, because she cried not, being in the city, and the man, because he hath humbled his neighbor's wife. So thou shalt put away evil from among you. There's two things here that we need to have a pretty good understanding of. The first part of that in verse 23 says, if a damsel that is a virgin be betrothed unto a husband. And the ending of verse 24 says, the man, because he hath humbled his neighbor's wife. We're talking about the same individual, so how do we harmonize those two? Damsel, wife. They treated someone that was betrothed, engaged, as if it were all that if it had already been done. They are now the wife of. So you can use both of those and be accurate. Why would they kill both of them? The man took her by force. I know where you're going in the field, but we're oh, thank you.
Thank you for teaching.
Says a warm thank you for all you do all year through 4 and 5 year old class. One of my favorites, hot chocolate. Thanks, Terry. Brother Dave was going to get us into the field, but we're still in the city here. The issue is that she had opportunity to ask for help, and maybe they're taking it as though there was people around that If she was in a house, she could have shouted and somebody come to her rescue. But since she didn't ask for help, then she is consenting. We'll go with it that way. Probably didn't take her by force, correct? Or at least she made no protest. Okay. Now, when we get to the field, verse 25, if you find the damsel in the field and the man force her, then the man only that lay with her shall die. But unto the damsel thou shalt do nothing, because she is not worthy of death. Well, it's a matter of whether or not they figured the woman asked for help. She's consenting if she don't ask for help. If you noticed in today's, I sort of hate to bring this up because when you go into a courtroom today and where those charges are, it seems like they want to put the victim on trial instead of the perpetrator of the crime on trial. The way she dressed, the way everything else, she shouldn't have been at that bar at 2:00, all of that. But they have now circled around, basically full circle, and if the woman says no, that ends it. So here, if they're sort of going back to here, if the damsel in the field had opportunity to ask for help, of course she didn't. The one in the city maybe had opportunity for help. So the guilty person is the one that's tried. Verses 28 and 29 go together. If a man find a damsel that is a virgin, which is not betrothed, and lay hold on her and lie with her, and they be found, then the man that lay with her shall give unto the damsel's father 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife, because he hath humbled her. He may not put her away all the days of his life. And this goes back to your verse 19 earlier. So in essence, what they're saying in these two verses is that premarital sex, no. If you do it and you're caught, then you pay the dowry or the ransom, and then she's yours for life. You're married to her. Verse 30 can be kind of a iffy verse. It says, a man shall not take his father's wife, nor discover his father's skirt. Now, where that seems confusing, let's break that down into two parts. Not take his father's wife. As we travel through the Old Testament, we find out where there's cases where the wife died, he remarried a much younger woman, and then he died. So then the son is not supposed to marry the father's wife. And was that Adonijah that we get to and possibly did that later on? And when it, right. And then uncovering the father's skirt, that just basically means that the wife is covered by the father's skirt. So if you now take the wife, then you have uncovered the father's skirt. That might not make any sense, but if you look at an example would be in the book of Ruth, where she goes and lays down and he covers her, and then he goes to make things right in the city gates for the next of kin. He's going to protect her, take care of her, make sure the right thing is done. So, questions or comments on 22? Chapter 23 deals with those that are excluded from the assembly. Starts out by talking about a man that is wounded. Also talks about an illegitimate person, child. Even takes it down to the 10th generation. We're talking about individuals. Now, when we look at verses 3 and 4, we're talking about groups. An Ammonite or a Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord, even to their 10th generation shall they not enter into the congregation of the Lord forever, because they met you not with bread and with water in the way when you came forth out of Egypt, and because they hired against thee Balaam, the son of Beor of Pethor of Mesopotamia, to curse thee. So, generally, those that are excluded from the assembly, it was based on something individual, some illness or disease or malformation. But then when you get to these two groups of people, the Ammonites and the Moabites, because they didn't help the children on their exodus from Egypt to the promised land, they went and fought against them instead of helping them. That whole group of people is now told that they cannot assemble. I personally find it real interesting that a Jew that lived in the 1st century AD could trace their heritage back to Adam. On and on. Well, 10's a perfect number, so it could be on down. Verse 6, thou shalt not seek their peace nor their prosperity all thy days forever. Verse 9 picks up with those that are unclean in the camp, or setting up the camp as a clean place, and that would go through verse 14. When the host goeth forth against thine enemies, then keep from every wicked thing. If there be among any man that is not clean by reason of uncleanness, that chances him by night, then shall he go abroad out of the camp. He shall not come within the camp, but it shall be when evening cometh, he shall wash himself with water, and when the sun is down, he shall come into the camp again. Thou shalt have a place also without the camp, whither thou shalt go forth abroad. And thou shalt have a paddle upon the weapon, and it shall be when thou wilt ease thyself abroad, thou shalt dig therewith, and shalt turn back and cover that which cometh from thee. Hygiene. And the reason is, verse 14, for the Lord thy God walketh in the midst of thy camp to deliver thee and to give up thine enemies before thee. Therefore shall thy camp be holy, that he see no unclean thing in thee and turn away from thee. And the reason I mentioned all the illnesses and diseases is what they do with, for various reasons, but what did they do with the lepers outside the camp? What did they do if people were found unclean because they touched dead bodies or dead animals or things outside the camp until purification was over, and then they were allowed back in the camp. It took a while for that situation to resolve itself. If you talk to any soldiers that were in England during World War II, even in the 1940s, it was a pretty nasty situation in the cities over there. Luke's up counting, so I'm not going to make 3 chapters. Verse 15 through 25 then is just dealing with miscellaneous laws. They're broken down into several different ones, but I want to look at verse 19. Thou shalt not lend upon usury to thy brother, usury of money, usury of victuals, usury of anything that is lent upon usury. Another word for usury would be what? Interest. So, if we bring that up to today's time, and I go over to Brother Clonch and say, Brother, I am in need. Could you let me borrow $100 for a month? Brother Clonch, being a good Christian, should say what? If he had the money, if he had it. Sure. But I want you to give me 110 when you pay it back. Is that the Christian attitude? We're not helping our neighbor if we're doing it. Now, there are reasons. We'll go down here later. Probably won't get to it. But if they're not of that body, then you can charge interest to the outsiders and the strangers and things of that nature. But if we are truly a family, we help people, and if they need to borrow money, we shouldn't charge interest on it. Why would, if they had the money to pay the interest, why would they be borrowing the money in the first place? And that's one of the things that really irritated me when I learned about the car business. It seems like those that had could get car loans for this amount, and those with a kind of a shaky past, those that couldn't really afford it, their interest rates were up here. You see these car places that advertise nobody turned down for a loan. You know how that works? If there's a car that has a market value of $10,000 and it has a wholesale value of $6,000, and you come in to buy that car and you don't have the credit history to do it, we will loan you the $10,000, but you got to pay $6,000 down. They're covering theirs and then making it up if they can, and then they're charging. By the time you pay for that $10,000 car, even if you put $6,000 down, you're going to be paying $20,000 for the car. So, and I totally believe that every one of these payday loan institutions should be put out of business. When you do the math, there are some people that are paying 100% interest on loans, because not initially, but the way they have to roll them over and keep rolling and building. To me, every payday loan institution is just like the politicians. They're carpetbaggers. They're people looking for opportunities to take advantage of situations. But also in verse 23, that which is gone out of thy lips thou shalt keep and perform, even a freewill offering according as thou hast vowed unto the Lord thy God, which thou hast promised with thy mouth. So, it doesn't say you have to do something, but if you say you're going to do it, here it's talking about making a vow to God, verse 21. But if you make a vow to God, you don't go back on your word. You don't have to make that vow. When Andrew and I were in the Philippines, there was a man, this has to deal with a different religious group, the Catholics, but one of his children was really sick, and he had gone in and prayed and made the vow that if his son would be healed, he would be the crucifixion. They did it annually, that he would be the one crucified for the next X number of years. So every, what we call Easter, Passover, he would go down and they would literally nail his hands, not with the big spikes, but nail his hands to a cross, and he would, and it even had a wheel on it instead of just dragging it, but he would walk down the streets and roads carrying that cross, rolling it down the street. That was his penance. So if you make a vow, keep it. If you know you're not going to keep it, don't make it. So we should also put that into what we do with each other. If I tell you I'm going to do something, I should do it. Thank y'all so much for your comments.